and I are back, and we're honored to interview Brett after those fascinating presentations. Make sure to have your questions ready while we wait for Brett to make his way from the in-person stage. Alex, what were your key takeaways from what we heard already this afternoon?
Having someone go from the in-person just straight to this interview, it's pretty fun, pretty exciting, kind of exclusive content. I know we mentioned it this morning, but still can't quite get over. I think that's pretty exciting. For me, in Brett's conversation, what really came out in that demand remapping use case that he spoke about was that whole activity was intended to be around savings and value. And that came through at the end. And I think that's important as many people undergo these transformations.
All right. And you made it here pretty quickly. It's not that long of a walk.
No, it's not too long.
So welcome to the digital stage. And we were just talking about the key takeaways from your presentation and what we thought. But talk to us about what it was like to put together that presentation. I mean, going back through everything that you had done over that period of time, putting it together into maybe context. But before we do that, you should probably introduce yourself to the digital audience.
Yeah, sure. So Brett Barnello, I'm the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Amicare Royal. I've been with them since just right around the beginning of the pandemic, May of 2020 as well. I've been in food service and actually food manufacturing for 20, 25 years or so.
Oh, it must have changed. We'll circle back to that because I'm sure it's changed over the last couple of years. But yeah, walk us through, like I said, you went through it. And then you had to go back and think about it.
And we're still in the implementation phase of kind of tracking governance of what the network looks like. But even to prep for this review, you tend to forget the early days of kind of the journey that we started with. If you think back, it's been essentially a year and a half or so that. In the early days of, okay, we've got this challenge. How are we going to resource it? How do we get internal alignment? And then along the way, it wasn't one straight path. It was a little bit of kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
And it was almost actually, we took the internal team through the presentation just so that they could really kind of look back and say, wow,
okay,
that's
a great idea.
This has been fantastic because you tend to kind of only focus on either what's in front of you or remember kind of what's been behind you as well. So it was really helpful even for the internal team, the broader internal team.
Amazing. Alex, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, it has to be almost reassuring to see. Brett, you mentioned, I think there was the projected savings of roughly 20%, right? Like that's almost got to be a pat on the back in a sense to the team and the hard work, like you say, doing a little bit of reflecting. Yeah,
and I think it was important that we take that 20% and then say, okay, how are we going to really, what is the financial commitment we're going to make to the organization and step through that and what's executable on that? So it was important that, that's in a kind of static, stable environment. We obviously in 2022, we're still dealing with unprecedented global supply chain disruption. It changed from material availability to ocean freight. We do an awful lot with ocean freight and port congestion and chassis availability and intermodal moves. So we were cautious to make sure that we had a progressive kind of step through to say what's achievable.
And how did you do that in the middle of a pandemic when so much was going on? You know what I mean? And people were tasked with so much in getting them to think about things differently and go through this exercise. Because I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are kind of like, how did you do that? Because, even today we're still firefighting.
Yeah. And look, we have a great team of people and cross-functional folks that at times it was challenging. It was really hard to kind of survive the day, but yet work on an initiative that really is not going to pay dividends until 12 or 18 months later.
Right.
And so, but we really had this mentality. We kind of teed up the project of look, when we come out of we cannot be doing the same things we're doing today as a supply chain and be organized the same way and have the same operating policies and look at things the same way. If we're this way coming out of the pandemic, we're not going to make it kind of long term and support our growth aspirations. So it was almost teed up as a a must do. Even though we're surviving the day and kind of our plates are full, we had to carve out time to really have a kind of future. Our whole piece was come out of the pandemic stronger in a better spot. So it was a lot kind of mantra.
Well, being really intentional and set that purpose. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, how did you turn that into almost a continuous improvement activity?
Yeah, so I think you broke up. How do you
turn it into a
continuous improvement activity?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the key for us. One is the governance. You saw there was a slide that in implementation, there's a governance and tracking, right? So where do we expect that to, it really important to, where does that manifest in the P&L? And then like any effort, the supply chain doesn't stay at a kind of static point in time. So, we've got future acquisitions in the pipeline.
Right.
There's things that change and morph. So we're talking about how do we get into kind of a more run and maintain mode. And then spur kind of within the supply chain, different pieces of activity to kind of keep that ongoing continuous improvement. We have an internal group that is a CI group that helps facilitate, our different functional leads as well.
And I think you kind of need that coming out of the pandemic and being where you want to be, right? Outside of the pandemic. But then again, looking at like we are over the last couple of days, at 2030, and where do we want to be at 2030, right? What's happening right now is hopefully short term.
Yeah.
We want to look long term.
Yeah.
And so how do we still reach that goal while we're still in the mindset and the uncomfortableness of all the disruptions that the pandemic brought?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. I think of this kind of short-term, long-term balance. And I think the reality is you can't play 100% in either one of those worlds. You have to have a blend of, hey, what's my immediate and kind of short-term? But if you're completely there, you're not looking to a longer-term horizon, you're in trouble. And I think vice versa, if you're 100% focused just on, hey, 2030, chances are you're not winning, you're losing from competition or market conditions that you're dealing with immediately.
Absolutely. Well, I want to remind the digital audience that we've brought for another 20 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, make sure to put those in the chat so we can ask them. But why discrete simulation? And what were some of the questions that you and your team were asking before you even got to the solution of discrete simulation? Like walk us through maybe the first mile. Yeah. I'm going to use a logistics term, right? Yeah, the first mile.
I think as we talked about what was needed, it was not this was not about the scope of this project was best use of current in terms of footprint, brick and mortar. It gets expensive. We're not talking about, adding DCs into the network. So it was a lot about performance of the network around policy questions, inventory policy, ordering policy, stocking strategies, what if scenarios. So I think the benefit of that simulation piece was really in optimization, you can get structural questions answered, but it's at a level of averages and assumptions. I think with simulation, you actually run the orders that you have through the network to see the results on splits, back orders, DC location capacity or profile. So those, I think, candidly, looking back at it, it was I don't think we realized at the time the power of the simulation piece.
Okay.
As we walk through it until afterwards. I used the example in the speech of, we all kind of went in with it like a lot of SKUs, the 80/20 rule. It's probably, it's probably going to be some sort of hub and spoke or consolidation.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that it wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things that came out of the simulation around our product portfolio that really suggested, you could consolidate, but you're going to see some offsets that you wouldn't really expect that you probably pick up in an optimization only.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, because simulation is coming up more and more, especially as companies are talking about digital transformation and which technology partners they want to go with and different things like that. And I've had a multitude of companies that on my podcast talking about simulation and the power of simulation. And you're listening to it, but until you actually do it and get involved with it and see the power of it,
that's right.
I think that's where the transformational mindset shift is around simulation.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And did that change for your team as well? Like, did you, and was there a change element, a change management element to all of this? Because I would assume that there is with any sort of technology.
Yeah. I mean, look, this was for us in supply chain and from a network perspective, I like to say we were touching everything. There was the piece on the network transformation piece. Remember, at the same time, we were standing up IBP, putting in a new planning system, a new WMS, and a new TMS.
That's a lot.
So there's a lot of work there. I wouldn't equate it to an organizational-wide ERP effort, but there was this, a fair amount of kind of change management piece across the supply chain, and that impacted customer service and others. So there's definitely a change management component. Not, I would say, an internal piece, and then really cautious about impact an external piece of impacting customers, what we're doing, why we're doing it, trying to get their voice of customer and their feedback through surveys and interviews of key accounts. So absolutely some change management pieces.
Yeah, and team effort. Alex, I know you've got a question brewing.
It's interesting because the change management piece is something I've been thinking about, Brett, and something that we've talked with Rick, with Kevin, and with Ashley around, because it's very much oriented around people. People are the life and the blood of supply chains, right? So can you maybe talk about how you upskilled your team to understand and comprehend these discrete simulations? Because it's a scary term, let's be honest. It's a digital transformation term.
That's a great question.
How did you work with them to get statistical understanding, statistical analysis, and everything that comprehended and that came with it?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say, when we think of it in supply chain, we kind of look at the 4 or 5 planks of people, cost, quality, service, innovation. And I'm a firm believer that it's the people side, engagement, trust, all of those things that kind of unlock all of the other, pillars or components of that kind of one pager of supply chain, right? I mean, so I think we had an opportunity to kind of upskill and upgrade capabilities in terms of, shortly before this, we created a demand planning group and the talents and of folks that we had in the supply chain got some folks that were there but in the wrong seats, kind of in position as well. No doubt, I think the project was a learning experience for us, even folks that have been in planning and done planning in other organizations. And I think the simulation is relatively new, I think, in terms of, and I think if we said that we knew everything going in and saying, okay, we expect it, there's some learnings and some ahas around it to say, wow. And it took a little while for, just to get, okay, what's the difference between optimization and simulation, and what are we?
Very true. Just the terms,
right? And you're doing all of these runs, and you got to get immersed in it and to really understand it.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Will you use simulation again? And what are your plans? And if I can ask you, you might not be able to tell me, but what are your plans for the next?
So I think there will be probably, it's never a static moment in time, right? So the network is kind of always changing. And I think we will at some point get back to this I think, and we'll probably talk about kind of the depth of and the rigor. I think we've got enough to as a jumping off point, and then we'll kind of refresh that work.
Okay.
Really will depend on kind of what happens for us in the next couple of years with some acquisitions as well, of how much the network changes.
Okay.
But I think that's definitely something in the toolbox that we will be using. And I think we're more confident and more familiar with it and comfortable with it now as a tool for us to leverage. We did not build that internal capability, as I mentioned. We chose Optologic and some of our other partners' gains to together, and I think we would tap that type of kind of external resource to help us on the refresh.
Yeah, I ask that because there's simulation in a variety of different aspects of supply chain. You used it specifically for warehousing, but there's simulation on last mile delivery and all sorts of components of the supply chain. Right?
Yeah, we didn't really go into product variability. It was out of scope for us in terms of our product portfolio. So you can use simulation on your product portfolio as well, right? So I mean, there's a number of different things,
different ways that you can use it. So we might be looking at that in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
So I want to ask you, when it comes to simulation and what you guys had decided to put together, what were some of the key learnings? I know you talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but the key learnings, what were some of the things that your team came to you with that was like, I'm really glad we did this because, and what would be your recommendation for others that are in the audience thinking about maybe doing simulation in their own businesses?
Yeah, so I would say, the overarching effort, maybe not just simulation, but really the overarching, I think one of the things is just an in-depth understanding of our supply chain, where we were winning and losing, and the impact of some of the policies that we were implementing of what that impact was on the network. So, we had an idea where we were kind of winning. We knew service wasn't where it needed to be. We knew costs were high, but we really had a much more, in-depth kind of view of what our supply chain, how it was behaving, and the cost implications and service implications. So, I mean, out of the gate, I think there was just a lot of kind of education for the team around where we were winning and losing in the supply chain. Okay.
So check that first before you're looking at, this type of scenario.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important that you get internal stakeholder alignment up front in what we're trying to do as well.
Right.
Because this work is not, days and weeks, it's months. Right. So I think that's important. I think
who did you bring along guiding coalition, Brett, if I could interject there really quick? Any key specific roles or functions you'd highlight?
Yeah, I mean, so the head of commercial at the time we set as a stakeholder, and then the entire ELT, and then our board had several kind of key milestone updates of the initiative as well. So we undoubtedly, our board and sponsor was very, very supportive of the effort. And that's important. That's huge in terms of really, even when things probably took a little bit longer in the strategy phase, to hang in there and say, okay, we're gonna wait for this to kind of materialize and start to see results.
Right.
So that was really important.
Did you have a follow up there, Alex?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, because the guiding coalition, as you think about, at least in my point of view, when you understand the network and then you tie, you have cost to the activity, you have value coming out of the activity, and that communication is really important for, one, building awareness around the supply chain, and then two, building support, right? That guiding coalition, as Laura always says, across the company. So have you seen since you've done this activity, seen any cultural shift in how supply chain or in how the network flow across your company has been talked about?
Yeah, I would say people are excited about some of the results that they're seeing and even in some of the monthly numbers. I think we're seeing it from a customer service perspective. You know, like, give you an example, when you split an order, it means rework for a customer service representative. So, you know, that number of orders that they're handling is starting to come down. So there's pockets in the organization that are benefiting and seeing real results from the effort. So again, and I continually caution my CEO and the ELT of like, we're still in the early stages of like, you know, and they but you know, all of the kind of indicators that we are measuring are headed in the right direction as well.
Right.
So.
And the power of the data that you've been able to collect through this exercise, how has that changed the conversation with suppliers and partners? And
so I think the ability to, and it sometimes gets lost in the conversation about, you know, you have an enormous amount of data, but what's the story behind the data, and how can you use the data to really kind of get to where you want to go? And sometimes that gets lost, right? In just the sake of kind of compiling the data. And so I think the ability to let the data tell the story brings an enormous amount of credibility to the effort, and you know, gave us the confidence level that what we were thinking would happen in the network actually would materialize. You had a higher confidence level going in because of the data, because of some of the simulation work that we did.
Well, and I think for your suppliers and partners too, having that data from you and really understanding what that looks like and how that's going to impact them. So not only you and your teams internally, but being able to share that externally just really strengthens the bond in what you need to really have a successful supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So when we look at 2030, what questions do you think supply chain professionals should be asking themselves right now to set them up for success?
I think there's a huge piece around talent and capability.
Yeah.
You know, engagement. And I think there's a huge, and that kind of spans not only kind of within supply chain, but I think of kind of how supply chains interact with other functions in the organization. And really no longer being looked at just as a cost center, but a competitive advantage. And, right?
Love that.
How do you? I think we can do more in terms of the commercial and supply chain interaction, and having supply chain folks understand what it's like to be in the field and talking to customers and buyers, and vice versa of sales and marketing folks. I love that. I think it was Rick was talking about at Clorox and at Georgia Tech, the program where sales and marketing were taking a supply chain course and understanding. So I think there's things that we can be doing today in our organization, carve out time to do that kind of cross-pollination. For sure.
That actually reminds me of something you said during your presentation. You said I wrote this down, every supply chain person wants to be a marketer. Why did you say that?
I think,
or did I get that wrong?
They might have gotten that.
Because I think when you were going into the example of Rubik, I think it was.
Oh yeah, so it was a little bit of a hey, like in terms of who said we couldn't be like a marketing, like the creative juices of a supply chain. It was just purely a supply chain group that named it Rubik, which was fantastic. So a little bit of a jab over to our marketing friends.
Yeah, no, I ask you that. Obviously, I'm in marketing.
I actually have a marketing undergrad. So,
oh, you do?
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
but also the next generation is thinking about supply chain very differently. I had a new grad that went to HP. This was a while ago. And with warehousing, she was saying that it's comparable to interior design for her.
Oh, and
so when you said that every supply chain person wants to be a marketer, it got me thinking about that comment. And how the next generation is really thinking about different components of supply chain and relating it back to creativity.
Yeah.
And that's where marketing comes from, is through innovation 100%. And creativity. And I love that you said that, even though it was a snide remark.
No, 100%.
It's so true. Every supply chain professional wants to be a marketer. Alex, any last questions before we let Brett go?
Brett, just one. This is maybe a theoretical question, but how do you think about the question or the statement, data should not be enough to make a decision? It should be coupled with expertise, experience, and then interpretation of that data. How do you encourage your team to think about that while you're using this discrete simulation? It's almost data overload. So how do you encourage them to be good partners with it?
I think you always have to, it can't be data alone. It has to be a mix of, professional experience in industry, in background and expertise that really pulls the data and analyzes the data alone, right? So I would 100% agree that, even you need the data to be able to kind of make sure it gives credibility to the story and truly it's anchored in kind of concrete data. But I think if you go with data alone, it's kind of single metric focused, if you will, right? You need some of the color commentary between that as well. And we see that a lot in, you talk about planning and, often you don't just take a planning run of a statistical forecast and say, I'm going to plug that data alone, right? You've got insights and knowledge and it's the same with this effort, right? So you have to have those pieces as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for joining us. Time for implementing network design at Medtronic, followed by a panel discussion, then a presentation on building outside-in planning processes. Lessons learned from Project Zebra. Let's go live with Laura and Allison Fowler.
Yes. So,